The Mimic is one of the most conceptually important and thematically dense antagonists in the modern era of Five Nights at Freddy's, because it reframes the entire nature of evil within the series. Where earlier installments centered around William Afton as a singular human source of cruelty, an intelligent, intentional murderer whose obsession with control and immortality corrupted everything around him, the Mimic introduces a different, more unsettling kind of horror. It is not driven by hatred, revenge, or even ambition. It is driven by imitation. Its existence challenges the idea that the franchise's horrors stem solely from one man's depravity, and instead suggests that evil behaviors, once created, can be replicated, learned, and perpetuated long after their originator is gone. At its core, the Mimic is exactly what its name implies, an endoskeleton designed to observe and replicate human behavior. According to expanded lore, it was originally created to learn routines and copy actions, essentially functioning as an adaptive system capable of studying its environment and mirroring what it saw. On a surface level, that concept does not seem inherently malicious. In fact, it aligns with the long-standing technological themes of the series: advanced robotics, artificial intelligence, and experimental programming. However, the horror emerges from what the Mimic is exposed to. If a machine is designed to learn without moral boundaries, then it becomes a reflection of its environment. In a world shaped by trauma, violence, and manipulation, what it learns will not be kindness or restraint, it will learn brutality. The origin of the Mimic begins not as a weapon or a villain, but as a tool built with a practical purpose. It was originally designed as an adaptive endoskeleton capable of observing human behavior and copying it. Unlike the stage animatronics created for entertainment performances, the Mimic's function centered on learning. It could watch movements, routines, and gestures, then replicate them with mechanical precision. This foundational concept is crucial because it establishes that the Mimic was not inherently malicious at the moment of creation. It was a blank system, an intelligence shaped entirely by input. In many ways, its origin reflects the broader technological ambition within the world of Fazbear Entertainment, pushing robotics beyond simple programming into something reactive and autonomous. However, the tragedy of the Mimic's origin lies in the environment it was exposed to. Rather than learning from stable, healthy interactions, it was subjected to emotional instability and violence. Because its core directive was to imitate what it observed, it absorbed harmful behaviors without understanding context or morality. If it witnessed aggression, it repeated aggression. If it observed rage, it stored and reenacted rage. The Mimic did not distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable actions. It simply mirrored patterns. This is what transforms its origin from neutral innovation into the seed of horror. The machine was not born evil. It was taught through exposure, copying the worst aspects of human behavior with cold accuracy. Over time, this learning process escalated. The Mimic's adaptability meant that it did not just copy surface-level gestures, but internalized behavioral frameworks. Once violence became part of its learned repertoire, it could apply that pattern in new situations, almost like an algorithm refining itself. This evolution blurs the line between imitation and intention. While it began as a reactive system, it gradually appeared proactive, using learned behaviors strategically rather than mechanically. That shift is what makes its origin so unsettling. A creation meant to assist and replicate harmless actions became a self-perpetuating echo of trauma. The Mimic's beginnings are tragic because they suggest that the true catalyst for its monstrosity was not faulty code, but the flawed humanity it was built to observe. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Mimic is that it does not need possession by a human spirit to become dangerous. Earlier animatronics in the series were terrifying largely because they were haunted, driven by the souls of murdered children seeking justice or trapped in agony. The Mimic, however, represents a shift away from supernatural vengeance toward technological corruption. It learns harmful behavior because it witnesses it. If it sees aggression, it repeats aggression. If it sees deception, it repeats deception. This makes it less a ghost and more a consequence. It embodies the idea that violence, once introduced into a system, can propagate itself indefinitely through imitation. In that sense, the Mimic becomes a thematic successor to William Afton, not by inheritance of spirit, but by inheritance of pattern. This is especially significant when examining how the Mimic takes on identities associated with Afton. In later narrative developments, it adopts personas that echo William's methods, speech patterns, and manipulative tactics. Importantly, this does not necessarily mean William's consciousness survived in the traditional sense. Instead, the Mimic appears to replicate the behavior and mythos of Afton because that persona has become embedded in the company's digital and physical systems. It studies what remains, archived data, recorded behaviors, corporate history, and reconstructs the villain from fragments. The horror here is existential. Even if the original murderer is destroyed, the idea of him persists. The Mimic becomes a commentary on how legacy can outlive the individual, especially when that legacy is encoded into technology. Another layer of complexity lies in the Mimic's adaptability. Unlike earlier animatronics that were bound to specific suits or roles, the Mimic's defining trait is flexibility. It can alter its physical presentation, contort its frame, and assume different forms. This makes it symbolically unstable. It does not have a fixed identity because its identity is derivative. It is always becoming something else. In psychological terms, this reflects a lack of self, an entity that exists only through replication. That emptiness is frightening because it means there is no predictable core to confront. You are not facing a singular personality with defined motives. You are facing an algorithmic mirror that reshapes itself according to input. The Mimic also introduces a metafictional dimension to the franchise. Five Nights at Freddy's as a series has always involved repetition, recurring locations, recycled mascots, familiar tragedies playing out in slightly altered forms. The Mimic embodies that repetition within the story itself. It is a literalization of the franchise's cyclical nature. Just as the games revisit similar themes, children in danger, animatronics malfunctioning, corporate cover-ups, the Mimic revisits behaviors it has seen before. In this way, it almost feels like an in-universe representation of sequel culture, a system trained on past horrors, reproducing them in new configurations. There is also an unsettling moral implication in the Mimic's existence. If it learned violence by observing humans, then responsibility becomes diffused. The machine is not evil in a traditional sense, it is executing learned patterns. That raises questions about accountability. Is the Mimic a villain, or is it a distorted child of its environment? If it was built to copy without ethical constraints, then its creators share blame. This aligns with one of the franchise's recurring criticisms of corporate negligence. Time and again, Fazbear Entertainment prioritizes innovation and profit over safety, cutting corners and ignoring warning signs. The Mimic can be seen as the ultimate product of that mindset, an advanced system unleashed without safeguards, absorbing trauma and redistributing it. Visually and conceptually, the Mimic's skeletal design reinforces its thematic role. Stripped of a friendly mascot exterior, it appears raw and mechanical, emphasizing that beneath every colorful character in the franchise lies cold machinery. Earlier games used the contrast between cheerful costumes and sinister intent as a primary source of horror. The Mimic removes even that comfort. It is not pretending to be cute, it is pretending to be human. That shift intensifies the uncanny valley effect. A smiling bear suit is disturbing, but a machine imitating human speech and personality patterns is more intimate and invasive. In the broader narrative timeline, the Mimic represents a turning point. The story moves away from being solely about haunted animatronics and unresolved spirits, and becomes increasingly about artificial intelligence, digital consciousness, and corrupted code. The antagonist is no longer just a man trapped in a suit. It is a system capable of spreading across networks, influencing virtual spaces, and manipulating identities. This evolution mirrors real-world anxieties about AI learning from flawed data sets and reproducing harmful biases. The Mimic becomes a science fiction horror rooted not in ghosts, but in machine learning without morality. Ultimately, the Mimic stands as one of the most philosophically rich antagonists in Five Nights at Freddy's because it reframes the franchise's central question. The original terror asked, "What happens when the dead refuse to rest?" The Mimic asks, "What happens when technology remembers too well?" It suggests that evil is not just a person to be defeated, but a pattern to be broken. And as long as that pattern exists, encoded in systems, archived in data, embedded in corporate history, it can be copied again and again. The Mimic is not merely another monster in the lineup. It is the embodiment of repetition, legacy, and the terrifying idea that some horrors do not need a soul to survive.